Jimmy Kay here, Metal Voice. Look at this. The Metal Voice shirts are now on sale. Just go to the video description to find out on how you can purchase one. Metal! Welcome to the Metal Voice. Today on the show, the one and only, the author of For Fact's Sake, the man who played with Ozzy, the guy who played with Rainbow, Richie Blackmore, and the guy who played with
Gary Moore,
who's got a new tribute album called
More Blues for Gary, a tribute album with Gary Moore. Brain behind the project, Mr. Bob Daisley.
Also, we have some Hall of Heavy Metal history news afterwards. But first, Alan, ask away those questions because I know you're a huge Gary Moore fan.
Bob, very anxious to have you on the show. It's a real pleasure, and talking about one of my favorite subjects and favorite guitarist, Gary Moore.
Hey, how you going? Hi, good to be talking to you. Well, he was one of my favorite guitarists of all time as well. You know, I've worked with a lot of great guitarists, and in some ways they're all favorites. But Gary was certainly up there at the top of the list. He was just brilliant. Yeah.
So let's go back. We'll try to do this somewhat chronologically. Okay. Back in the Victims of the Future days.
But Alan, let's just give a quick plug to his new album.
Well, we're gonna do that.
Okay, all right. Go ahead, Alan. Go ahead.
Yeah, we're gonna do that. We're gonna do that for sure, Jim.
It's all off the cuff here, Bob. Yeah. It's all off the cuff.
So Victims of the Future, Bob. How serious was Ozzy about replacing Randy Rhoads with Gary Moore at that time? And how did you meet?
Well, he wasn't thinking of replacing Randy with Gary Moore. Gary Moore was his first choice.
Oh, okay.
And when Ozzy was in LA after he got fired from Black Sabbath, he was, thinking about putting a band together, and his first choice was Gary Moore. But, Gary didn't really want to work with Ozzy because of Ozzy's reputation of, drugs and booze and being a bit sort of unprofessional, unreliable, and all that. But so Gary said, look, I'll help you find a guitarist, or if you find guitarists that you want my opinion on, I'll help you that way. But he didn't want to join Ozzy himself, but Gary had been Ozzy's first choice.
Yeah, that's understandable, Bob, because, here's a guy that left Thin Lizzy because of their certain substance abuses and left him in mid-tour and went and hid out at Glenn Hughes' house.
As it all turned out, I think it all turned out for the best.
So you played on Victims of the Future. I think Ozzy actually sang backing vocals on the title track. How did you play with Gary before that album? No,
I knew Gary. I'd met Gary, but I hadn't actually worked in the studio with him, and that was the first time. And I think it was just from meeting him in Jet Records, and because he had a band called G-Force.
Right.
And G-Force was on Jet Records, and that's the Victims of the Future thing was, he needed a bass player to come in and play on a few tracks, and he had Mo Foster, who was a great player, and he had, I think maybe, I don't know if Neil Murray played on some of it as well, but I did about 3 tracks, and I really enjoyed it because I loved Gary's playing, And
then we went into, after that was One for Cover, which you also played on. I believe it was you played a Once in a Lifetime off of that album.
Yeah.
And Glenn Hughes.
That was near the time when I ended up playing permanently with Gary. Well, what happened was he was doing a live video. In those days it was VHS video. So he was doing one to be released as a live show, and he was doing 2 shows in Dublin and 2 shows in Belfast in Ireland, and it was called Emerald Isles.
Okay.
And he asked me to do that with him, so I did the rehearsals. I think I had something like 14 songs to learn and be filmed playing them live. I think we had about 4 or 5 days at John Henry's rehearsal studio in London, and then went to Ireland to do the shows. It all turned out well. Gary was really happy, and after that 4th show, he said to me, he said, "This has been great." He said, he and I worked very well together. We got on very well together. It was a similar sense of humour. Gary was very witty and funny, and very serious about music, but once the music was sort of established and he was happy with the way everything was going, we'd have such a good laugh, you know. So there was never any shortage of fun. It was great. It was a good atmosphere. It was enjoyable. And he said to me, "Look, if you're ever interested, the door's always open."
Great.
You know, that was his way. So. Yeah, so it wasn't long after that. I was still officially with Ozzy at that point, but it wasn't long after that Ozzy and I parted company, and I ended up working with Gary permanently, and that was in 1985. I joined Gary permanently.
Yeah, and you did the Wild Frontier album, which was a great album, and you had your release.
Yeah, that was a good album too. Yeah.
With Neil Carter.
And we did that show that was filmed in Stockholm. I think it was Stockholm Ice Stadium.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and that was. It's a shame that it wasn't re-released on DVD, but it was only ever released on video, on tape. So, but that was a good show. That was everybody was on form, and it was
a very Celtic feeling to that album with songs like.
Oh, sure. There was always that Irish flavour of you know in stuff, and Gary was very into that, and it was. I suppose, you know, his roots in Thin Lizzy and with Phil Lynott, and, right. You know, coming from Ireland and that, it was really in his blood, and he was very passionate about, you know, the country and the people and the way of life, and also the troubles there, you know, yep. it affected him, the whole thing. So.
Which he covered very well in the next album, After the War, which you also played on, with songs like Isle of Emeralds, which talks about the troubles, and then the darkest son of Ireland, right. As he called Philip in that song. So,
yeah, I think Gary was also very, very hurt and very sad about the death of Phil Lynott. He was close to Phil, and they were good mates. And you know, when Phil went, I think that you know plucked a string on Gary's heart. So, but it was during that After the War tour, which was 1989. That I suggested to Gary about doing a blues album. You know, it was in the tune-up room each night. Gary and I used to sort of just noodle around on little bits of old blues classics and some of the John Mayall and the Blues Breakers stuff. You know, with Eric Clapton and that, and we'd just sort of pick out things and sort of mess about with them, play them. And one night in the tune-up room before a show in Germany, I said to Gary, "Look, while we were doing this," I said, "Well, why don't we do a blues album?" I said, "We should do a blues album." And he kind of shrugged it off at first, you know, but the penny dropped and he started to get serious about it. And I said, "Look, I'll send you some ideas or suggestions of maybe classic blues stuff to cover, you know." And then one of the first ones that I sent him was a song by Albert King called "Oh Pretty Woman."
Right.
Because the solo in "Oh Pretty Woman" starts exactly the same way as Clapton used. He sort of stole Albert King's solo from "Oh Pretty Woman" for the solo in "Strange Brew" that Cream did. And I mentioned that to Gary, and that was one of the first songs that Gary covered then.
Well,
Gary kind of considered it as a bit of a side project. It was like, "Oh, yeah, I'll just, you know, give this to the record company. Here you are, here's another album, I owe you one less now." And it was sort of like that. And I actually said to him, I said, "Gary, you watch. This will be the biggest thing you've ever done."
You were right, Bob. I mean,
yeah, he wasn't sure that would happen. But that year was 1990. He phoned me on New Year's Eve. It was New Year's Eve 1990, just going into 1991. And he phoned me up. He said, "I just want to say Happy New Year," the usual stuff. He said, "And you were right." He said, "This album it's flying up the charts. It sold 3 million and it's still selling."
But, and you know, Bob, being a fan of Gary back in the day too, After the War has some good tunes on it, but it was as if his career was completely directionless. He had no direction whatsoever. Even the photo on the album.
Well, I think Gary was always a bit of an experimenter, or he explored things and he explored different avenues, and there wasn't always stability in the direction that he was going, or the you know, he would try different genres and that, you know. But I think once he hit on the blues, that gave him more direction, and then the albums had more continuity.
Right. And again, correct me if I'm wrong, but it just seemed like the record company, they knew his talent, but they just didn't know what to do with it. Here you got a picture of him with hairspray and his hair all spiked up, and the look on his face is priceless. It's just like, what am I doing, and how did I get here? And on the inner sleeve, you know, and you felt for Gary, you know, because that. Yeah. And then, I mean, hats off to you, because I think everybody's indebted to you for suggesting that Still Got the Blues album, because it relaunched his career. He had a second or a third career, if you want to include or fourth, even if we go back far enough. I mean,
sure, he'd done, you know, he had experimented and explored other avenues and other genres of music and that, but once he hit on the blues thing, and especially when that song, Still Got the Blues for You, took off, it sort of put him on the map internationally.
It made him a household name.
He had been. You know, there were territories that we were very big in, you know, as a sort of Irish-flavoured rock band, you know, doing the after the war and the, you know, Wild Frontier stuff and all that. You know, places like Germany and Scandinavia and England and that, but you know, the blues thing really helped to crack America for him, and that's what did it. You know,
now, if we can speak about
and it was a great song. You know, he wrote a very good song there. Still Got the Blues for You. It was a really good song. It was sort of you'd categorize it as blues, but it wasn't sort of you know, strictly speaking, just out and out blues, because it was sort of radio friendly blues and kind of like, you know, it had a commercial angle to it, which was, you know, which helped a lot.
Now I got a question for you, Bob. You being one half of a rhythm section, I need to know what playing with Brian Downey was like. Yeah, because he's one of my favorite drummers of all time.
That was great. You know, I did some tracks with Brian Downey. And he's got such a great feel, that guy. You know, I really did want him on the tribute to Gary Moore album with all these other great people, but he wasn't available, and he had some health issues, so I couldn't push it and I couldn't press him on it. But God, yeah, playing with Brian Downey, he's a great drummer. Got such a great feel, such a great groove, and yeah, he's. You know, it was just a shame that he couldn't be on the tribute to Gary album, because there was such a connection there with them.
It goes back years, yeah, and exactly. I was in Ireland a couple of months ago, and he was doing the Brian Downey experiment where they played Alive and Dangerous, the whole set. And I was trying to describe to somebody I was with what Brian Downey is as a drummer, and it's hard to put in words besides, like you said, just a great feel, because he does so much and he's so respected as a drummer, but again, at the same time, relatively unknown.
Well, that's right, yeah. It's, you know, I think that was part of the big, you know, Thin Lizzy feel and groove and that as well, was Brian Downey. It was that it wouldn't have worked as well without him. And I remember another time that I played with Brian, with Scott Gorham and with Gary and Bob Geldof and that one. It was a sort of a kind of a Thin Lizzy reunion for a big charity show in Dublin in Ireland for the Irish unemployed, and was only Irish acts on it, like U2 and the Pogues and Thin Lizzy and all bands like that, you know. And I was working with Gary at the time, and he said, look, you know, we're doing a kind of reunion of Thin Lizzy to pay tribute to Phil Lynott, and also to as a charity show to help you know, employment or unemployment in Ireland. And so I went to Ireland with Gary and the lads, and we did a couple of rehearsals. We only did about, I don't know, 3 or 4 songs or something, but it was, you know, the boys are back in town, and the Cowboy song and Whiskey in a Jar and stuff like that. It was such fun playing it, you know.
And then you released After Hours that you participated in with another great track, Separate Ways, I believe is on that.
After Hours, I think I played on Key to the Highway on that.
Could be, yeah.
Because I'd been away, like Gary was recording that album, and he knew that I was. My mum had died in Australia, and I was in Australia for around about that time. And when I got back, He'd recorded a lot of the album, so he said, look, you know, come down the studio and play on a track, and I did, and it was Key to the Highway. And he hadn't been happy with the bass sound and the performance and that of whoever else had done it before me, but I just went in and did it, and he loved it, you know. So yeah, it was just that one track, but it was still good to do.
And then he released Blues for Greenie. Now this, I need to ask you about this. This Les Paul, that I've never heard that tone from anybody else that Gary played, that he got from Peter Green. I mean, what was it like listening to that guitar, playing live or in the studio?
Well, when I did that album with Gary, and it was towards the end of 2003, I went to London and recorded Power of the Blues album.
Right.
And I had such fun because it was so spontaneous, you know. And he had that 59 Les Paul Standard there. He actually had two of them, believe it or not. But the Peter Green one he'd had since the early 70s.
Yeah.
Because Peter Green had had some sort of problems and issues, and when Fleetwood Mac broke up, and he wasn't using it. And I think Gary bought it off him, and he didn't pay a lot for it, but we're talking back in 1972, so I think it was around then when Gary got it from Peter Green. And he did that album as a special tribute to Peter Green, the Blues for Greenie one, and he did all Peter Green material, and it was sort of Gary's hats off to Peter Green, and it would have been a nice little earner for Peter Green as well, and a nice sort of recognition of, you know, Gary was riding the crest of a wave then, you know, so for him to do that album, would have been nice for Peter, you know, and I did want Peter on the tribute to Gary Moore album that I've just done, but, you know, he's not the easiest bloke to deal with, and it just didn't work out.
Yeah.
You know, he would say, yeah, I'll do a track. What track do you want me to do? And we'd suggest one, and I'll get back to you. And then it was like we'd wait for several months, and then my manager was dealing with his manager, and his manager's a woman, and she was saying, you know, Peter's, you know, he's a bit sort of difficult to deal with sometimes, and it ended up not happening. So I was disappointed about that, because Gary and Peter were mates, and Gary thought very highly of Peter Green, and Peter Green in his day was probably one of the best white blues guitarists that ever lived, you know.
He was, people don't remember him, but he was one of the greats right there with Clapton at the time. So.
Oh yeah, even B.B. King said that's the sweetest guitar tone that I've ever heard.
Exactly.
And that's coming from B.B. King. That's really saying something. So.
And then to go back...
You know, Fleetwood Mac, though, in those days, we're talking 67, 1968, around that period, and they were just young lads. But they really understood the simplicity and the authenticity that they reproduced in their music to understanding blues, because there were lots of white blues-influenced players around, and you know, like Cream and Zeppelin and the Yardbirds and the early Rolling Stones and all that. But I don't think many young white people played it with such authenticity like Fleetwood Mac did, with, you know, John McVie and Mick Fleetwood and Peter Green and Danny Kerwin and Jeremy Spencer, and great players for just young lads, you know, brilliant.
And then to go back to your set, Gary always liked to surprise people, so when he felt he was getting a little pigeonholed in the blues, he released the Dark Day in Paradise and a different beat, which was completely different, something that was completely off the wall and unexpected.
Maybe he just thought that it was getting a bit sort of, you know, like you say, pigeonholed, and wanted to get out of that a little bit. You know, he did that sort of tribute to Jimi Hendrix thing too, which turned out very well, because, you know, Gary was such a good player that he could sort of, you know, do his version of those songs and make them sound good, which he did. But I think probably, you know, where his heart really lay was in the blues stuff, because it was what inspired him to play to start with. He saw Cream in their very early days. Well, and I think he was only about like 14 or something at the time.
And he was part of Cream for a little while around that time too, right?
Yeah, that's right. It was kind of like a version of Cream, because it was Jack Bruce, Ginger Baker and Gary Moore, and
BBM.
And it was a bit like sort of, you know, Gary joins Cream. That I saw them live in London in, what year was it? I don't know, late 90s or something.
Yeah. I just remember that.
You know, it was good, but I think there was that certain... You see, with bands and musicians working together, you can put them together on paper, or you can look at it as, well, this should work, or this looks great, or this person with that person, whatever, and put them in a room together. It doesn't always work, you know. You got to look at the chemistry and the energies between them, and I think that, you know, when Cream got together, Eric Clapton, Jack Bruce, and Ginger Baker, that magic was instant. You know, it was just you couldn't sort of like plan that as it turned out, you know. And even though Gary was such a great player, you know, the Jack Bruce and Ginger Baker thing, it wasn't quite the same as having Eric Clapton in it because of the chemistry, you know.
Get back to the Bob Daisley connection. Now, Power of the Blues, which you co-wrote a lot of songs. You're a big part of that album. So Gary did his little experiments, his side jobs, and now he's back into the blues. So
I was really, really pleased to get the call from Gary, because we hadn't worked together for, you know, good few years. Every time, because I came out to Australia in 98 or whatever it was, and when I went back to England, I'd always see Gary. You know, we'd meet up and we'd have a lunch, or we'd meet up and have a dinner, or I'd go around to his house and we'd, you know, and we always had a laugh and a you know, or a meal or a drink and socialise. But I hadn't actually worked with him for a while, and that year in 2003, I'd done quite a lot. I did a stint with John Lord with my blues band, the Hoochie Coochie Men, and then I did an album with Steve Morse and Lee Kerslake, Don Airy, and Jimmy Barnes called Living Loud. And I'd done, you know, a lot of flying around the world to Florida and then to London and back to Sydney and all that, you know. And it was coming sort of towards the end of the year, and I was watching a TV program called Air Disaster Investigation, which is about planes crashing, and I thought, God,
yeah.
I'm glad that I don't have to fly anymore for a while this year, you know. And I think it was the next night, after having watched that program, I got the call from Gary. He said, I'm starting a new album in London next week. Do you want to do it? And you know, I wouldn't hesitate. Of course I wanted to do it. I said, yeah, sure, count me in. It was, you know, it was great. So I flew over there, and the plane didn't crash.
Good news.
And when I got there, I think I got there on a Friday or a Saturday morning, and I was in the studio in London with Gary on the Monday morning. I was, you know, tired and jet lagged and all the rest of it. But it was, we did a lot in a short time. It was really spontaneous. It was being recorded like just a live band in the studio. You know, Gary overdubbed some solos and bits, and he I think he re-sang the guide vocals that he was doing, but the basis of the tracks, that, you know, Gary's guitar parts and the drums and bass with a guide vocal were all done together in studio live, you know. So it was going really well. It was feeling great, you know. I was just enjoying every second of it.
Produced by the late, great...
I said, we went in on the Monday morning, and by Thursday afternoon he said, God, we've got 9 basic tracks already. And we'd only been in there 4 days. He said to me, it took me 3 months to get to this stage with the last album. So he was really pleased, and it was going well, and you know, I think we finished the album as far as you know, all the tracks, and I said we ended up recording about 13 tracks, and a couple of them weren't used, but it was just such fun. It turned out great, and it was done in a short period of time. So that album does have a certain sort of energy about it. It
does.
And you know, I love that album, to be honest. You know,
and it was
I enjoyed playing on it, and I enjoy listening to it. It's great.
And it was produced by the late, great Chris Tangarides.
Ah, yes.
Who we've had on the show as well.
Yeah, that was a sad moment when he went, because I'd been talking to Chris on the phone not long before he died.
Wow.
And it was, I knew he'd had Legionnaire's disease, and he hadn't been well. Legionnaire's disease can affect your heart in you know, in a dramatic way, and I think that's what got him. And yeah, very sad when old Chris went. He was a nice chap too.
We were lucky enough to have him on our show here, and we were lining up some other shows when we learned of his unfortunate passing. So it's a great loss for everybody.
Yeah, well, there's some stuff that I was talking to Chris about. There's a guitarist that I know that I've worked with before with Eric Singer and that, earMUSIC, and he was going to do some stuff, and he'd been talking to Chris Tangarides, and I was thinking maybe I'll go over and see Chris, and we'll do it at his studio and that. But then he died, and that was the end of that. It was pretty awful. But yeah. And someone else who died that was very disappointing too was Jack Bruce, because we'd asked Jack Bruce if he'd sing on a track of the tribute to Gary album, because Jack Bruce and Gary were mates. They'd worked together. They were good friends. They respected each other, and Jack immediately said yes. And I thought, great, I'll have Jack Bruce singing on a track, because although there's many, well, there's several different keyboard players, several different guitarists, various singers, there's only one bass player, and that's me, because it was my project.
And harmonic. Well, let's get right to that, Bob. Let's talk about More Blues for Gary as a tribute. Bob Daisley and Friends, a tribute to Gary Moore. We can talk about that album. It's a great album. Lots of big names.
Oh, sure. I'm just so pleased with the way it turned out, because doing something like that, it can be a gamble. There's been lots of so-called tribute albums to various people over the years, and some of them they pull it off, and others aren't so good, and some are just not good enough to be called a tribute album, and some should be called insult album. But I was so pleased. But I knew that doing a tribute to somebody as great as Gary Moore, it had to have great people on it, and it had to be first class. And I chose all the songs, and I chose all the musicians, and I chose the songs for the musicians, and it all turned out great. And I was just so pleased that, after I came home from the mastering studio the day we had it mastered, and I hadn't sort of, just listened to it objectively as just put an album on and have a listen. And I did it that day after we'd mastered it. And I sat down and I thought, wow, I'm really proud of this. This has turned out great.
And the lineage...
And I thought, if I'd have gone down the shop and just bought a CD of an album, brought it home, and sat down and listened to it like this, I'd be thinking, this is money well spent, because it's turned out so well, And what was encouraging for me, when I just thought about doing it, I started asking around. I phoned Steve Morse, Steve Lukather, Glenn Hughes, and when Jack Bruce said yes, and that, I thought, wow, this is really encouraging. And people were saying things like, I'd be honoured. And really? I thought, wow, that's coming from people like this, that's a really, really good thing to hear. So I thought to myself then, once they started saying stuff like that, yes, but didn't even hesitate. Yes, I'll do it. Yes, I'd be honoured. Stuff like that. I thought, I've got to do this. I really knew then, that I had to do it. So. And when Jack Bruce said yes, and then several months later he died, I was sort of doubly saddened by it, because just losing Jack Bruce anyway was sad enough. But to think that he was going to sing on the album and then didn't, that was sort of like a double whammy for me.
And it was great, Bob, the way you went out and got, people that ties to Gary's past. Of course, Glenn Hughes being a great friend of his.
Well, yeah, I did. I wanted some of the Gary Moore family to be in there. That was like a real thread running through. Even the very first singer that he had in Ireland with his band Skid Row, Bruce Shields. It was great to have him on there. It's a big part of the Gary Moore family tree and Gary Moore history,
Well, let's get to
there's Glenn Hughes, and there's Neil Carter, and there's Eric Singer, Don Airey, all these people that were directly connected to Gary.
Exactly. And so let's get to a few of the songs now. Like here, beautiful harmonica playing, by the way, on Empty Rooms, a very different take, and a fantastic take with Neil Carter, who of course...
Oh, yeah, it's just a little bit of harmonica I stuck on the front.
Yeah.
I play some blues harmonica, and it just sort of had the right mood for that. It almost gave it a kind of... Well, that whole intro, I think, it's kind of a little bit sort of like Cajun swamp music or something, because Empty Room, I wanted to include that song because here's a trademark song for Gary.
For sure.
It was, in the mid-'80s, it was just a radio-friendly rock song, and people liked it. But I thought, how's this going to fit in with blues stuff, So I knew that I had to do a different arrangement of it, and so I did it that way, and it worked really well. I thought, you know, it's and obviously the person to have on that track was Neil Carter,
co-writer,
because he'd worked for so long with Gary, and he co-wrote Empty Rooms with Gary. So to have him on keyboards and singing it was just ideal, you know.
So and you know, you got, how did you get John Sykes to participate? He's been kind of reclusive the last couple of years.
Well, yeah, I didn't realise how reclusive he's been until people started telling me. I just, you know, I don't always keep my finger on the pulse of what everybody's doing all the time, and I just got in touch with him, and I knew that he'll openly admit that Gary was an influence on him, you know, and John Sykes is a great player, and you can hear some of the Gary Moore stuff in his playing, and he does it well. And I thought, well, John Sykes he's a great player, loves Gary. I should have him on a track, and he immediately said yes, didn't hesitate, you know, which was great. And I hadn't realised at the time of asking him that he'd been sort of, you know, under a rock for a while, but you know, so it made it even better, you know, that he hadn't done anything for a while, and he comes out and does this, and people are saying, "Wow, great! It's great to hear John Sykes playing again, and playing so well, and he did a great job, you know."
I thought he did that song. Look, there's only two guitarists that I can hear their tone of guitar, and I can tell you exactly who it is, and that's Gary and John Sykes. I mean, John's got his own sound as well.
You go.
That's very, and it right away on this song, and it's probably the song on the album that comes the closest to the Gary Moore playing, I would say.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I mean, nobody like really sounds like Gary. Only Gary.
You know, and I'd like to go into
there are, you know, people who. Sorry?
I'd like to go into that a little bit more, Bob, because I agree 100%. No matter how, you've got Steve Lukather, Steve Morse, John Sykes. These are heavy hitters out in the, and nobody ever sounds like Gary Moore.
Yeah, nobody sounds like Gary, which is in some ways a good thing, because it's like what I didn't want to do was I didn't want to recreate what Gary had already done. Right. And I didn't want to compete with Gary and say, oh, this version is better or whatever. It was just my personal hats off to Gary and saying, Gary, you know, your playing's great, your songwriting's great, and here's some of my favourite stuff that a lot of it we did together, and you know, it was sort of my personal hats off to Gary. And to have people like John Sykes and Steve Morse and Steve Lukather and Doug Aldrich and, you know, people like that on it was great. And then there's Jeff Watson and Joe Lynn Turner on a track, which was kind of like me, Jeff, and Joe together. It's kind of like the Mother's Army thing, saying, "Here's our little tribute to Gary as well," you know. And Steve Lukather, what a lovely bloke, and what a great player, you know. He's and that song that he played on, it's not a Gary Moore song. The Blues Just Got Sadder. It was a song that I co-wrote with someone else here. But I always had Gary in mind. I thought he'd be great to do this song, you know, but I didn't get a chance to play it to him before he died.
Unfortunate.
But I thought it'll be a nice sort of personal message from me to Gary, saying, you know, since you've been gone, the blues just got sadder. So, you know, it was a nice song, and Steve Lukather did a great job on that song.
You know, and
really tasteful playing. And
I try to explain to people that aren't familiar with Gary Moore, you know, like you got Joe Bonamassa that's out there, that's a great player. But I try to say, like, Joe Bonamassa, well, he plays from his head, where Gary played from his heart and, quite frankly, from his balls.
That's exactly, you've hit the nail right on the head there.
Yeah.
A lot of people, we've had lots of virtuosos over the years, and a lot of it's impressive, and a lot of it's clever, and a lot of it is sort of, wow, you can play technical stuff with speed and all that. But, you know, it is from the head. And there are a lot of singers like that, too. They sing from the head to try to impress, and they'd sing too many notes.
Exactly.
And it's without real feeling. If you do it from the heart, and it comes from the soul, makes all the difference, and that's where Gary was coming from.
And the other thing, you know, I think he played from a little lower than the heart, too. I mean, I say he's got a ballsy feeling to his thing, and no matter how soft or melodic his lines was, there's always a little underlying tone of aggression in everything that he played. Like,
oh, sure.
You know, that's something that...
I always had that. Yeah, it might be this is sweet and this is sensitive, and this is just a few notes to make you emote, but I fucking mean this, and
exactly.
it's like that, you know.
And that's what makes him, for myself, that what makes him such a special player that can't be duplicated.
That's right.
Very few people that play like that. Yeah,
and you can take the exact same guitar with the exact same strings and the exact same string gauges and the exact same amp and mic it with the exact same mic and then the amp with the same settings and all that. And it might sound similar to Gary, but without those two sets of 5 fingers, it won't sound just like Gary.
Yeah. So
without that heart and soul of Gary, it will not sound like Gary.
And again, on the album, you've got Steve Morse playing with Parisian Walkways with Ricky Warwick, who's in the Black Star Riders. You know, again,
they did a great job too. I was really pleased with that because it's not Gary's version. It's not. I mean, it's a similar sort of arrangement and similar parts, and it's the obvious same melody and all that, but it's different, and I wanted it different, you know. And I think they did a great job, you know.
I mean, that was
Rob
Gary...
Grosser, who's the drummer on some of the tracks. He was the drummer with us with Hoochie Coochie Men with John Lord, and it was his studio that we pieced it all together. And Rob Grosser he was great in the studio at sort of editing and engineering and all that, and we spent a lot of hours, you know, because I would ask people to do 2 or 3 takes, you know. If you're doing solos, if you're doing guitar parts, send us 2 or 3 takes, you know. If you're doing vocals, send us more than 1 take. And so it was like, pick this bit out of that take and that bit out of that take and put them together, and then it was... So what you hear is an actual human performance, but it's from various takes. So there was a lot of work involved in that, and you know, that which is another reason at the end of it all. It was I knew that it was a labour of love, and it's turned out great because of that.
I mean, that was you know, Parisian Walkways to Gary Moore was like a Thrill Is Gone to B.B. King. I mean, that's his signature tune.
Oh, sure, it was. It was another flagship. It was another signature tune. You know, like there's a couple of them. You know, but Parisian Walkways was definitely, you know, one of the main ones. As was The Loner and Empty Rooms.
Yeah. I mean, I must have...
And the obvious ones too about the Blues for You too. I mean,
and again, I must have 20 to 30 different versions of him over the years of all his recordings of Parisian Walkways, and the first one is and I still find one of the best is Live at the Marquee, where he just holds that note. It seems like for 3 days, you know, and when he gets to the climax,
I know, with that sustain that lasts. Yeah. I don't know, how long does it last? Like 70 seconds or something?
I counted one time. You're pretty close to 70. But what was the feeling playing live when you would play that tune? Would the hair on the back of your neck stand up?
Oh yeah, it was. You know, playing with Gary live, it was. I'd look across at him on stage and that, and often it was. You know, the audience is being entertained here, but so am I. I mean, I had fun with Gary on stage. You know, we'd sort of bounce off each other playing-wise and all that. You know, but it was always like that. You know, to look across and think, wow, you know, this is a great situation. And I remember it because it gets etched into your mind and soul and heart, and you remember it, you know. And there were times in the studio with doing that Power of the Blues album that I can remember like it was yesterday, where I'm playing there and just enjoying it so much because of the feel and the emotion and the energies and chemistry in the room. You know, it was like, I remember thinking to myself, God, it doesn't get any better than this. I am just loving this.
Right.
And I really was. And during one of the songs that sort of stands out in that area is the first song on the tribute album, which is That's Why I Play the Blues.
Yeah, and I mean, again, you've played with, you know, Richie Blackmore, Jakey Lee, tons of all-star guitarists. I mean, where does Gary rank amongst them?
I wouldn't like to say, because I often get asked that question. You know, they rattle off all the guitarists of like your Steve Moore, Steve Vai, and Randy Rhoads, and Jakey Lee, and Gary Moore, and all these, you know, Richie Blackmore, and all these different people, and they say, which one do you rate the highest, or who's the best? And I just say, there is no real best. You know, I think whatever the situation was at the time, they were the best in that situation. You know, Richie Blackmore was the best guitarist in Rainbow, and Randy Rhoads was the best guitarist in the Blizzard of Oz, and Jakey Lee was the best guitarist in the Ozzy Osbourne band, and you know, and Gary Moore was the best guitarist in the Gary Moore band. You know, it's very difficult to say, well, he's better than him because of this, or he's, you know, and they were all enjoyable, and they were all, you know, great musicians and great players, and it would be just too difficult to say, well, he is my all-time favourite, or he's my all-time favourite. You know, I love them all, and they've all been great, and you know, I've always rated Gary very high on the ladder, you know, and well, one thing I'd like to add about Jakey Lee too is that Gary rated Jakey Lee very highly. He sort of hinted at, you know, saying that, you know, I think he's one of the best ones that Ozzy ever had. You know, that was his attitude. And
so, could it be said that Gary was a harder musician? He was a little bit of a perfectionist. I mean, did you see any of that? Sometimes
sure, it was. He could be a taskmaster, and he could be, you know, strict and do it this way, and this is how I want it, and all that. And if you understood that, and you understood what to do, how to do it, and he'd be happy. And it was fine. The atmosphere was light and enjoyable. But if there were problems and anybody was like pushing the other way or going against the grain, you know, yeah, there could be problems. So it kind of happened with Cozy Powell. Like, we had Cozy in the band at the beginning of the after the war tour.
Oh, really?
And we had about 3 weeks rehearsal at John Henry's in London, which is a, you know, well-known rehearsal studio. And at the end of the first week, I phoned Gary and I said, Gary, look, you know, Cozy's great. He's a great player. I've known Cozy years, and so have you, and it's all good and all that. I said, but are you sure that this is going to work out? Because I could feel, you know, that it just wasn't connecting between Gary and Cozy. I think they saw everything from a different angle, or whatever it was. Anyway, Gary said to me now, he said, look, don't worry, it'll be all right, it'll be fine. And then by the end of the second week, Gary was phoning me saying, yeah, I think I see your point. So that, you know, we were supposed to start the tour. I think we had another few days rehearsal, and then we were supposed to start the tour. But that first, maybe the first and second show got postponed, and when we took a bit of extra time we brought Chris Slade in.
Right, from AC/DC.
And he was a great drummer, a nice bloke, got on well with him, great drummer, did a great job. He was ideal. He was exactly what Gary wanted and needed, because Gary would say, play it this way, do this here, don't do that there, and Chris would do it, and he would do it how Gary wanted it, and it was like done deal. And so that was like a light atmosphere then. It was all happy, and it was all, you know, all pleasure, because there was a bit of tension happening between Gary and Cozy, and I could feel it. I knew it was coming.
You could see it, yeah.
By the second week, so did Gary.
Thanks very much. Thanks for the labor of love and putting this out there, because it is a truly tremendous album. Highly recommended for everybody. Go and check it out and purchase it. And don't download it illegally. Go out and purchase it, because it's well worth that. You know.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because you know, this pirating and sharing and burning and illegal download and all, it's just ruining the industry. You know, like musicians, you know, players, writers, producers, people spend a lot of time and a lot of money on producing records, and they're not free. And musicians need to be paid, and it's going to be a long time before we get back even half of what we put into this. So that is an important point that you've made. But you know, I'm just so pleased, you know, obviously for myself, but I'm so pleased for the sake of Gary and his name and his you know, history, and that the album has turned out so well, that people love it so much, and that the reviews, I couldn't ask for better reviews. That, you know, people have just been raving about it, which is fantastic. You know, it's like, what a great you know, part of Gary's legacy to have an album that's been received this way and that's been respected and loved, and that's, for me, that's worth it all.
And again, Bob, that's why we do our show here. It's a labor of love as well, and having you on the show today and allowing us to talk for an hour about Gary Moore has been a real pleasure for myself. It's been an honor, and we got some good news was announced today.
Oh, big news, and I'm sure, Bob, you know about this already. Bob Daisley, Lee Kerslake have been inducted into the Hall of Heavy Metal History. So tell us how you feel about that,
Yeah, that's
Bob.
great. That just really puts some nice icing on the cake, let me tell you. Yeah. And I know I spoke to Lee last week about it, and he's over the moon, because Lee's not having a good time at the moment. He's had some bad health issues, and you know, we don't know how much longer Lee's going to be around. You know, he's been, the doctors have told him you might last another year, you might last a couple of years, but then again, he could go in a few months. We don't know, and it's all up in the air. So for this to happen for Lee, you know, it means a lot to him. I know it means a lot to me. It means a lot to us both, and it's something that's you know, really, really nice to have.
And you know what? Another surprise for all you hard rock fans out there. John Sykes will be accepting the induction on yours and Lee's behalf. Isn't that exciting? The guy we said isn't.
Yeah, that's really nice, and it's appropriate, and it's great, considering that, you know, John, like you say, John hasn't done a lot over the last, you know, recent years, and that John is on the tribute to Gary Moore album, and it's great to have him accept our awards, and it was really nice of him to say, because he actually said to me, like, normally I probably wouldn't want to do this or get involved or whatever. He said, but for you, I'll do it. And that was really nice. So thank you, John.
That's great.
Well deserved. For fact's sake, the book, please pick it up. Excellent read. I know the reviews on this are excellent, off the charts. You want to?
Yeah, I'd like to thank people too. Anybody who left a review, because if you go into Amazon, whether it's Amazon UK or Amazon USA or whatever, the reviews on For Fact's Sake are just brilliant. You know, people are loving it, but they take the time to give it a good review, which I really appreciate. You know, they don't have to do that. They could just say, oh, well, I spent the money, I read the book, I enjoyed it, so what? You know, but they go in there and they encourage other people to buy it, or they give their opinion and views on how they enjoyed it and why they enjoyed it, and it's just great to see that. So anybody listening that left one of those reviews, thank you.
Well, thank you, Bob, for taking your time out of your schedule to be with us here today. Again, it was a true pleasure speaking to you.
Bob, I see a part 3, though. I see a part 3
We can
happening.
hope so, yeah.
I want to talk about Eternal Idol next time around.
Yeah, let's do it.